Israel's next major objectives could literally change the entire course of this war. We're talking about hospitals. Now, from the perspective of the Israeli Defense Forces, they say intelligence dictates that hospitals in northern Gaza, they are being used as headquarter facilities for Hamas. And not only that, Hamas has tunnel systems under these hospitals, and apparently Hamas is also using these hospitals as munition storage facilities. Now, on the flip side, Hamas is saying, and Palestinian doctors, nothing of this sort is happening. These are just hospitals, and not only that, they are saying Israel is sieging these hospitals, and there's no power in these hospitals, causing a lot of loss of life. Okay, let's go ahead and dig into this. Now, first things first, international humanitarian laws, the rules of war, it's extremely strict on ever attacking a hospital or even considering a hospital to be a priority or a military target. It's very black and white. According to international humanitarian law, health establishments and units, including hospitals, should not be attacked. This protection extends to the wounded and sick as well to the medical staff and means of transport. The rule has few exceptions. Now, we'll get to that in a second. However, this rule, again, anything that has to do with medical, you are not allowed to attack. Okay, so here's what's going on. Israel wants 100% security for northern Gaza. And what Israel means by this, eliminate all Hamas targets. Now, unfortunately, Hamas targets might be inside of this hospital, so there is some coordination going on right now between Israeli Defense Forces and the hospitals in northern Gaza, mostly Al-Shifa Hospital. Al-Shifa Hospital is said to be the main headquarters for Hamas. I want to put a quick disclaimer out there. There are other big hospitals in northern Gaza, but the media seems to be, everyone's watching Al-Shifa Hospital, so we'll just use them as an example. So here's what's going on right now. Israel is in this extremely gray area on whether or not they're allowed to attack this hospital. Now, we saw in the international humanitarian laws, the rules of war, this arbitrary rule book that militaries are supposed to follow. Again, Israel knows that they can't just attack that hospital. They can't even attack anybody in that hospital who's wounded, even if they might be an enemy combatant. However, again, there's this caveat. So right now with Al-Shifa Hospital, it's said that there are losses of life due to the power running out, such as like infants. It's getting extremely bad. And not only that, Israel has even said it's getting so bad, they are talking to hospital officials and allowing for hospital officials to try transporting those patients to southern Gaza, where it's a little more stable than northern Gaza. Now, please don't get this twisted. I am not trying to form a narrative. I'm just trying to show you the entirety of what's going on and how hospitals might become military targets, as we're sort of seeing. Now, the caveat to Israel being allowed to not necessarily attack these hospitals, but prioritize it as a military objective, international humanitarian law lends hospitals special protections during the war. But hospitals can lose their protections if combatants use them to hide fighters or store munitions, the International Committee of the Red Cross says. Now, here's what's also interesting. Israel is really under no obligation to prove to the world or show the world or to get permission from the world that we are going to enter this hospital and we are going to deem it a military objective. They're not going to just go on Twitter and show you guys everything. Now, Israel has been saying over and over and over again, these hospitals, especially Al-Shifa, it is a military target. Hamas is using it. Now, does this totally justify everything? No, because again, when you go back to the other side of the international humanitarian laws, which is staying away from hospitals, the international humanitarian law, again, is very strict on you have to give a lot of warning or you have to do whatever it takes to not attack these soft targets. A soft target is something like a school or a library, any area that would have absolutely nothing to do with a conflict. So right now we are seeing Israeli Defense Forces trying to almost like befriend the hospital staff or show the hospital staff that they are willing to work with them. Now, again, we're getting a lot of conflicting stories here, and it's very hard to get accurate information. According to some of the hospital staff, a plastic surgeon even said, Israel is sieging our hospital. Now, the word siege, again, is very vague. What exactly is a siege? Encircling an area, cutting off energy to an area. According to hospital staff members, Israel is sieging their hospitals. Now, this would be highly against the rules of war, but again, Israel is saying, well, we're actually talking to the hospitals and we're allowing for the evacuations of more infants and more civilians to get out of those hospitals so they can be safe. Now, does this constitute a warning? I actually don't think so. I think this constitutes what Israel should be doing and what the United States is saying Israel should be doing and the outside world. Like the United Nations has actually threatened Israel on investigations, asking Israel, are you doing enough to protect civilians? Now, if you're sitting here and you're down the middle of, I sort of get it, I sort of don't get it, like it's a hospital, but there's bad guys in there, should I attack it or not? I'll give you a real-world example. The U.S. military and a lot of veterans actually complained about this during the end of Afghanistan. The ROE, the rules of engagement, were almost set against U.S. military members. It got to the point for U.S. military members where you literally had to get attacked before you could strike back. And the reason for this was to minimize any sort of collateral damage for U.S. military forces. Now, there are also a lot of cases where the U.S. military knows there is a combatant, like in a school, or we know there's a combatant in a field. However, again, no one was allowed to do anything just in case the U.S. military has collateral damage. So look, Israel is not dealing with something foreign to other militaries, but I want to tell you the U.S. military has always struggled with the policy of should we do it, should we not do it? Now, as far as sieging a hospital or deeming a hospital as a military target, this is where Israel is going to show the world on whether or not their intelligence is 100%. I'm here to say, if that hospital does not have any signs of military activity, there's no munition storage, there's no tunnels, I think Israel is going to be in a ton of trouble, also from the United States. The United States has really stuck their neck out for Israel and has trusted Israel to do what they want to an extent. For the most part, the U.S. military, Biden, Antony Blinken, everyone is trusting Israel to allow for humanitarian aid to go into the country, to allow for these 4-hour pauses that are happening. But now when it comes to like, hey, we are in front of a hospital, once you start to send in military members, Israel better have their intelligence straight. So let's go ahead and go to that worst case scenario. We might as well jump that line. And let me know what you guys think in the comments. So if there's nothing there, what happens? Well, I think the international committee and other foreign powers are really going to start to question Israel. Now, Israel is not stating they're about to go into these hospitals and just, go in there and level it out. Israel just wants to peek inside of these hospitals. They want to see what's inside of these hospitals. They want to look for any sort of evidence that'll back the fact that Hamas is inside these hospitals. Again, as we review the international humanitarian laws, if Israel can already predetermine or prove to people that Hamas has been using those hospitals, and it's a very cut, dry evidence, Israel does have the right to go into these hospitals. But again, just like the U.S. military, where there were times the U.S. military knows there are mosques and schools, like known combatants are in those areas, the U.S. military in a lot of cases would just avoid it and wait for those guys to leave. Now, Israel's in a totally different situation, maybe like under these hospitals, if there's tunnel systems everywhere and Hamas is using these tunnel systems, they can just go ahead and leave and walk away. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I think Israel is just on the side of they have to deal with it. Just like every military in the world in modern combat, and even as far back as like Vietnam and World War II, there are times where you just can't do anything about it. I am going to stick my grounds here. I'm going to say that. Look, Israel's claiming that they've controlled all of northern Gaza. Would 3 major hospitals all of a sudden change the tide of war for Israel? And look, if anything, if Israel knows there are combatants in these hospitals and the combatants start to come out and Israel starts to gather evidence, I think it looks way worse for Hamas, because Hamas is also trying to gather support or render support on people funding their campaign, or to at least believe everything they're saying. So either way, I really do think Israel's in a lose-lose situation. Like, okay, let's say there are military targets in there, and Israel walks on in the hospital. I still think it actually looks pretty bad for Israel. And if Israel does nothing about these hospitals and it's being used as an outpost or HQ, again, Israel now has to deal with the fact that threats are right in front of their faces and they can't do anything about it. This is why conflict is terrible, and this is why militaries always have to find a way to get around these soft targets. Now, it's extremely, what's the word I want to use? Heinous. It's extremely disgusting if Hamas is using these hospitals. But again, I think Israel will have to try and deal with this. I think Israel's main objective for these hospitals should be to save anyone who's inside of those hospitals. Civilians should be priority number one. Because according to a lot of reports, right now there's no electricity in a lot of these hospitals. And because of that, we're getting a lot of casualties, injuries, and they need to be evacuated out of the hospitals. Now, the other big question is this: are these nurses and doctors, are they obligated to leave northern Gaza to go to southern Gaza? From what I'm seeing, these doctors could care less about this occupation. They want to save the souls of humans who are struggling in this conflict. And I think regardless of what side you're on, I hate even using, hey, what side are you on? I think everyone can agree that hospitals and the civilians should be priority number one. We should be saving civilians no matter what side you're on. I'm not saying this is so black and white. I'm not saying this is easy. But again, I truly do think if Israel continues on trying to classify hospitals as military objectives and they are wrong about it, this is going to be a completely different story, and I think Israel's going to be in some trouble. I mean, I don't know how the U.S. military and the United States will respond to this, because, again, they've trusted Israel with a lot of their operations, and Antony Blinken and Biden has even said, you guys need to tone it down, and you need to do more to save civilians. Israel is trying to do whatever it takes to save civilians, from what I can see. But now it's getting bad if there's no electricity in these hospitals. So we'll see what happens. Again, I don't think this is a simple solution to anything. This is a very difficult conflict. Israel has to figure this out.